he said, you promised me. And he stuck out his hand, and they leaned forward, bent near me, to near my ear, and whispered, "'Cause you don't want to make me mad."
This video, really, this lady, I just couldn't stop listening to her. As a psychiatric nurse practitioner, seeing patients across the lifespan with different conditions, including trauma healing, neglect from childhood, and how that shows up in your current relationships. This one, this channel, I talk about recognizing red flags. Know your attachment styles, knowing how you present in relationship in regards to codependency, in regards to your own internal narratives, especially when it comes to belief system. The Christian community preaches a lot about being kind, forgiving, and not centering ourselves really, especially marriage, especially women, making sure you make the marriage work, really letting go of really toxic behaviors even when it doesn't serve us. I mean, the key point that I took from this video is like really learning to center ourselves, recognizing red flags in people, and recognizing our own codependency, like in ways where until that person in the relationship is okay, you are not okay. You're gonna do everything and anything, including losing yourself, in order for that person to be okay. Then you are okay. So I'm hiding my closet a little bit just to give my take on this video. And the main thing is recognize these relationships are not normal, and only a few percentage, like it's a big research out there about the percentage of people who actually experience a relationship with people who have narcissistic tendencies. Here I put tendencies. And the circular way, and she put it so well, circular, it's like you can never make any tangible, reasonable, fair decision making in the relationship. Is always and always circular. It's always like you're running around the stump of a tree and you just keep going around, just not recognizing the end point of it. It's just like constantly going, and if you allow yourself, you're just gonna keep going, and you're gonna get dizzy and tumble and lose yourself, lose your mind, lose your mental health, your physical health, your other health. And do you see how you're running around, and you're recognizing the relationship you are, and you can never make any reasonable decision making with that person. It always gets thrown back at you. They make you feel confused, they make you feel sad, they make you cry a lot, they make you question yourself. Your self-worth, your self-esteem is down the toilet. You literally look in the mirror and don't recognize who you are anymore. It's like you are kind of constantly playing this game, but the game never comes to an end and you never win. They seem to be the one who wins. They present well, very well to the world. They present completely, air quote, normal. And if anybody interacts with them for the first few times and they don't know them well, they might say, "Oh, what is she saying? No, this person is like not even like that. They're, if anything, they are so kind, they're nice, they are awesome." One sec. You see what I'm saying? Kids are home today, so there we are, getting ready for evening time. But I wanted to put my take on this real quick. All the red flags that was presented in this narrative, in this story, in this 29-part story. And she's a psychologist, and some of these guys are very conniving. They go for the women who are highly educated, who are pretty, who have something going for them. She has her own business. She's wealthy. She knows her stuff. And they try to cut you at your knees. They try to humble you constantly. They try to make you miserable. They try to diminish you. They try to get you to their level, especially if you're a people pleaser. You want to do anything for them. But the point is, recognize it the first, second time and run. That's what I tell you. Sometimes you don't see it until you're in it. And when you see it, don't waste your time. Don't waste them changing. Therapy doesn't help. Hear that story? She went to therapy. Sometimes therapy even makes it worse. They get their families involved, their side chicks. And if you talk to their exes long enough, you recognize this person is not for you. And they might be for somebody else, and it's okay. And it's okay to let go. This person ain't for you and will never be for you because there's no alignment. And there might never be alignment. You guys don't gel. And the thing is, in the Christian community, once you're married to someone like that, they say different things. Do counseling, pray for him, love him, give him children, give him the coochie, like back and forth. Be more quiet, be more submissive, go to church more, like serve him, like please him. You change, you will see, embody the kind of love you want to have from him. And when you live your life like that, then he becomes like you. These people are not like that. They are narcissistic. They're manipulative. They are sometimes even psychopath. They are sadists. They derive joy. Check my video that talks about sadistic narcissists. Actually, they want to see you miserable, and that's how they have joy. They see you miserable, they get the energy, positive or negative, they want to get you. And guess what? You are the one internally embodying suffering. Sometimes you can get unalive by somebody being hired or being poisoned slowly. See how she was being poisoned? Wink, wink, some of us being seen. But the outside world don't see what we see. This is to share the story so even one person sees the signs. You can't love them out of these behaviors. Okay, bye.
So this is part 21 of how I met, married, and got scammed by a gold digger. So we leave the therapist's office and he stops to buy some shoes. I'm feeling hopeless. I already felt hopeless. I mean, I know that this relationship is just a bust. Even though he keeps saying he's never worked so hard and he really wants us to work and that he loves me so much. But the second half, I can tell something has shifted, that my return has diminished my position. I am now in a worse position than I was in before. And I did it thinking that I could somehow leverage back half of the company. And I'm finding that I did it that wrong, that I didn't do it in the right way and that I lost the advantage that I had. And now I'm trying to figure out a new advantage. And yet there's a part of me, there's still an optimistic piece of me that hopes that we can somehow get on some good footing. I thought maybe this psychologist that we had hired would somehow bring healing to us. Because here's the part that really tripped me up about him, that I didn't understand about predatory people. I realize now that they have a whole different worldview and they have a different language and a different understandings of things. They don't see things the way that people who are agreeable and conscientious and collaborative see things. They see it from a standpoint of competitiveness, like win-lose, like zero-sum game, that if I win, he loses, or if he wins, I lose. He sees it that way. Like, not that we can walk away as two winners. I didn't understand that that's how he saw the world. I kept thinking we could walk away both winners. And here's what he shared about himself that really held me captive and made me feel so sorry for him. So when I first met him on that first day, he shared he'd been sexually assaulted by a woman, that he'd been groomed as a young boy to please this older woman. And he continued to kind of uncover this story. Now, I don't know how much of it is real. I never verified it with his mom, but he talked about it actively around her. And then he even said that he got more information from her. But remember, they spoke in Spanish. Then my Spanish wasn't that good, so I didn't know if that was true or not. He also shared that his father was a cruel, horrible man, that they were a middle-class family, moved a lot, and that he would be gone. His father would be gone for 2-week periods and leave the family with so much cash, and that wouldn't be enough to sustain a family of they had a lot of kids, and it wouldn't be enough to sustain it. So by the end of that 2-week period, they would be living on like fish broth with no fish in it, just maybe a few bones, trying to just get enough protein from a little bit of the meat to to survive as a family, this large family. And he early on started working for himself. He learned that he could dress up and sell newspaper on the sidewalk. He would carry groceries out to people's car for a few pennies, and he also learned how to shine shoes. We often joked about that, that he'd even demonstrate how he'd shine people's shoes. And his father didn't want him working. That was to the father's horror. So he did this secretly, earning enough money for him to be able to buy things like get a haircut or buy some clothes or whatever he needed for school or whatnot. But his mom then blackmailed him and said that if he didn't share that money with the family, that she would tell on him, which meant in that family that he would be abused. His father was a violent alcoholic. So when he was home, the family, apparently, according to my ex, the family lived in terror of this man, trying not to upset him. And to the point his father had so much control over the family that he would even count the number of toilet paper sheets. They'd count the sheets. They were allowed to have no more than 2 to use. And in Mexico, you don't throw your toilet paper away and flush it, so it'd be in the trash. So the father could tell if someone was overusing the toilet paper because there would be a wad of it instead of just a couple sheets of it. So that's the kind of house that he grew up in, where it was horrific. Now, I got to live with his mom for 8 months, and again, she didn't speak any English, but what little I learned from her was that she agreed she was not a good mom, that she'd found God late in life and become a different person, but she herself characterized herself as not very motherly, not very, very kind to her children, and she was pretty rough. And he said that you can't trust her. His dad had passed away, and when my ex was living in the United States, but he still was in touch with his mom. But he said you can't trust her. She watches out for herself. But that was a really different world than I had grown up with. As much as my world wasn't particularly safe, at least people kept their word, and we didn't really practice a lot of deception. So that was really unfamiliar to me. But I felt sorry for him. There were times that I could see the vulnerable little boy who dearly just wanted to be loved and held and trusted, and he wanted life good. I didn't understand that I don't know how much that was real, honestly. I know it compelled me and made me feel very sorry for him, and it made me characterize him as a person in need. See, so where, like, my first husband, Brad, was dying of cancer and he was in need, and he needed me to stick by him and make these sacrifices. In my head, I saw Caesar as in need. I saw him as controlled by his appetites, his addictions, struggling against a terrible past, wanting to be a different person but not knowing how. And it made me feel really bad for him. It made me feel like I wanted to be the person that could help him and rescue him. And it also made me feel responsible that who walks away from somebody in need? So you think about it this way. If you had a child who was a really rough child, young, rebellious, hurtful, hateful, are you a good parent who walks away? No, love is sacrificial. Love sees this stuff through. It doesn't say, I'm out of here. And the same with somebody who's having a terminal cancer. I had a friend whose husband had brain cancer. He was abusive. He became worse and worse as the disease overtook him. Now, is it okay for her to have said, no, I don't want this, I'm out of here, I'm done? No, we would have judged her for that. So where is the line? If this is a person who's struggling with a real addiction, and if he had really truly a traumatic past, and as well as I did, is it hurtful of me to say, this is just a little too much, I'm out of here? I couldn't see where those lines were. I was really struggling to identify when it's appropriately an exercise of commitment versus when I was actually being taken advantage of. That was a super fuzzy line, extremely hard for me. And I had grown up with an identity of for the good of all, not for the good of me. To put myself first would have felt immoral. I mean, that's how deeply entrenched this was in me, is that I really had a perspective that God saw this love of mine and championed it, not saw it as that if I didn't do this, that I was actually in violation, a moral violation. So I was not going to just lose this relationship, this marriage, but I was going to lose the integrity I had had with my bigger commitment level. So all of it came together and made this super hard for me to see the truth, to see what was really happening, and the fact that this person was being highly deceptive. Let me say it again, being highly deceptive, had incredible ulterior motives, and that there was nothing safe or good about this for me at all. So that's where I'm going to end part 21. This is part 22 of how I met, married, and got scammed by a gold digger. So we come home from that appointment, and I'm feeling like things have got to change. I got to be prepared to start living life for myself, on my own, potentially find a place that really makes me happy. Where we're living obviously is not it. We're renting a home. The home that I was living in, that I did own, I don't want to move back to because it has all of this nasty memory. So I start to think maybe we can find someplace new. We actually go away for the weekend and visit north of Cancun, and we come across this amazing gated community that had a building development project in it that had gorgeous houses right on the water. And I'm thinking, I could see myself in this place, and I could see myself, living here. And he's of course supportive, because that means I'm bringing more money into the country, and that it increases my exposure even more to the company. But I'm just looking to start over, a fresh start, but maybe even a start for myself. Although I'm still, believe it or not, naively hoping that we can make this work. But as I'm doing this, as I'm moving into this deal with this new developer, I'm feeling prompted. I'm hearing something say, don't do this. I'm still quite sick, but I'm hearing something say, if you do this, you're cutting yourself off from the community that knows you in Playa del Carmen. You're going to be out there alone, and no one will know if something happens to you. Don't do this. It's an isolated community. It's isolated from even Cancun. You will be alone, and this is not smart. Don't do this. In the meantime, we're preparing to take a trip away. Our second anniversary is coming up. We've been working really hard. Now our business is now being managed by a different company. So we plan a trip to Barbados. I'm kind of hoping, again, naively so, that maybe this somehow will recapture some things. Maybe we can have some time alone. We can really connect and get to know each other and get on a better footing. By the way, that sex date direction went a bust, complete bust. We went to try the first night. He says, "Are you excited?" And I said, "No, I'm nervous." And he pulled away and said, "Oh, well, that hurts my feelings." And that pretty much was it. He found a way to sabotage it. And our intimate life was really hardly inexistent. That part of the relationship really primarily ended before we got married. And I know some people who want to say even the whole reason the marriage happened was because of that. No, that wasn't what was driving this relationship. It really wasn't. I mean, it drove his bad behavior, but it wasn't driving our relationship. So we're getting ready and planning for Barbados. We're flying flying south into South America, hopping, south and then over is the way to the flight. We get up to the date when we leave, and I'm still looking for an out. I can't find a way to get him to the attorney's office, and I'm feeling more and more like trapped financially. Like this relationship's not sustainable, but I can't find an out. So we on the flight on the way down, we actually have a layover in Panama, and it's a huge layover. It would land at night, and we don't leave until the next morning. I wanted to find a hotel to stay in to get out of the airport, and he said no. He thought it made more sense to stay there because of security, how much time security would take, and not wanting to fight because it always went miserable. He stonewalled me a lot. I just said okay, thinking I don't know how I'm going to do this, but okay, we're going to spend the night on the floor. So we try the business lounge, and they kick us out because they're cleaning. We end up on the carpet, and I'm allergic to dust, but we're on the carpet. Finally, we get up and we get going, and I'm feeling funny, like I can't breathe. It feels like I landed in Mexico City, not landed in Panama. Like I'm at 5,000 feet or whatever footage, it's almost a mile up there versus sea level. Panama City is sea level, but I can't breathe. Like it's high. My chest is hurting. And I say to him, are you sure we're not at altitude? Because it sure feels like that to me. He goes, no, we're at sea level. So we have breakfast, we get on the plane, and the plane starts to climb and gain altitude, gain altitude. And I'm feeling increasingly worse, edgy, I want out of my body, like something is incredibly wrong. And I look at him and I'm looking around and I'm frantic. He's grabbing the emetis bag in case I need to vomit. And I'm feeling terrible. And all of a sudden I pass out. And I wake up on the floor across the passenger aisleway, looking up at the next group of people in the other seats up into their faces as they're peering over top of the seat at me. I can tell I've wet myself, I've lost bladder control, and that I must have really been out. There were people over top of me. There was a man and a woman, and the woman identified herself real quickly as a nurse, and the man said that he was a doctor who happened to be on board. And they started to say, what did you have for breakfast? How are you feeling? And I can also hear them talking. They're taking my pulse, talking to each other, taking my blood pressure. And he said to the nurse, the doctor said, her pulse is fast and thready. I don't quite know what that means, but I know that's not a good thing. And then he looks at me and says, what did you have for breakfast? And I can see the picture of eggs in my head, and I can't speak. I literally try to, and garbage comes out of my mouth. Nothing comes out of my mouth. And they give me something to sip. I can tell it's like orange juice or something. I can tell. I know. I'm still thinking. I'm thinking they think that I have low blood sugar or high blood sugar. Yeah, low blood sugar, which is why I passed out. That's why they're giving me, this high fructose drink, thinking somehow that's going to help me. But I also knew that I was not diabetic. This had nothing to do with my blood sugar. And he again asks me another question. And again, I can see the pictures of the images in my head. I know what I want to say, and I try to speak, and it comes out gibberish. And as a psychologist, I know this is bad. That means that my Broca area of my brain has been affected, and I'm aphasic. That there's two parts. There's Wernicke, has to do with comprehension. I'm understanding everything. I'm comprehending just fine, but I can't speak. The words are not coming. So I somehow starts to dissipate and go away, and they get me to my feet, and then, which I'm mortified because I was wearing a dress and the backside's all wet, and they move me up into the first class along with Caesar, and then they move the doctor next to me to monitor me for the rest of the flight, and they're asking, do you want us to land? Where we could land in Bogota, Colombia. Do you want us to land? I'm thinking, and I said, like, how far away is Barbados? They said it's 2 more hours. I'm thinking, I don't want to be in Colombia. Let's just go to Barbados. At least I don't know anything about Colombia. That just to me feels like more vulnerability. I just don't want that. So I'm watching the doctor sit next to me, and he's writing his notes. He's turning in an incident report to the airline, and I see him write, she's either suffered a stroke or she's had a mild heart attack. I just know I feel bad, that something's essentially wrong. And they're still monitoring my oxygen level, which is running low. So it's running almost upper 80s. And he keeps saying, you can't fall asleep. You got to stay awake. You can't fall asleep. So we arrive in Barbados. They exit the whole plane, make me get off last. The emergency service is there. And they come on and they do my blood pressure, take my blood pressure, and they say it's normal now. So we don't see what the emergency is. She looks okay. She's talking. So we're going to release her with the direction that she needs to see a doctor. So meanwhile, Caesar's mad because I didn't get good care and putting up a storm. But we exit the airport and we go to our first Airbnb because we arrived early. Because the way flights worked on Barbados, it wasn't like easy in, easy out. And that becomes important in a little bit. So getting in, we had to arrive a little earlier than actually our reservation was for the stay. And so we stayed in Airbnb. And I just remember that night feeling like really fragile, feeling like something's wrong. I don't know what's wrong. I can't seem to get on any footing anywhere. I'm back vulnerable with this company, and I don't know what to do about that. And I just remember falling asleep that night, just feeling worried, concerned. So that's where we're going to end part 22. This is part 23 of how I met, married, and got scammed by a gold digger. So we're in Barbados now. We've checked out of the Airbnb and go over to the resort where we plan to stay for the bulk of our trip. And it's just not the same. Even though it was owned by the similar company that we had with the honeymoon, and it even looked kind of similar in the way the layout and everything, it just doesn't feel the same. And he's tense and surly. I don't feel good. I feel, again, stretched like I did after I collapsed, or actually after I was hospitalized in May of 2018. This is now, we're talking May going into June of 2019. I'm just feeling really fragile, like something's wrong, essentially wrong. And he's just picks fights. It just is stressful. It's not any fun. And finally we wrap the trip up and we head over to the last day before we leave, because again, flights were not easy to get in and out. And we're staying at this little Airbnb that I thought was cute. It was right on near the water. We're right across from a hotel that came with a pool, and it was very rustic. That's the best way. It was like a one-room cottage with a second loft as a floor, like where the bedroom was. But it basically kind of opened up to the front because of the warm weather, so it wasn't really completely enclosed. And it didn't have it wasn't like no oven. There was a microwave and a partial set of silverware. And it was just tiny. Like, I bet you the whole place was maybe 600 square feet, something like that. It was really rustic. I thought, frankly, it was cute. It was done up sort of like Grandma's cottage. It had that sort of feel, with yellow and white, cute, trimmed out. But he's not happy. We struggle to find it with the taxi. We get there and he's not impressed that he has to climb up the thin stairs to get up to the loft where the bedroom and bathroom is. It's just, he's not happy. So I suggest, hey, let's go over to the pool. Maybe we can cool off and unwind. We get over there and he starts to fight with one of the lounge chairs that had gotten embedded in the rocky soil there. And it rained too much and it had gotten the slides caught in the rocks, and he's fighting with it. I'm in the pool watching him fight with it. And while he's doing this, he starts to chew me out in a way he's never chewed me out before. He says, the problem with you, Carrie, is that you don't think. You don't think about anything. You didn't give any thought about what's in this cottage. That in fact, it doesn't even have a full set of silverware. You just don't think. Just chewing me out. And I'm watching him fight with his chair, chewing me out. And I swim around a bit, and I don't want anywhere near him. I'm feeling so hurt and so shocked by this unfair attack, by how tense things are between us. So I get out and I go walk down to the water, and it's gorgeous. I'd never been to Barbados before, but it's like it's an island that feels like it's just a big volcanic rock. So I step out onto this edge of this rocky cliff, and I'm looking out over at the ocean that's rolling in, roaring in, and splashing up underneath of me. And I can tell that where it's rolling in, it's eaten away, it's worn away that rock, because of the relentless beating of the waves, that I'm basically standing on a ledge. And I'm thinking, this is what he's doing to you. He's wearing you out. He's like that ocean, relentlessly beating on this rock. And it's eroding the rock to where eventually this edge, this lip, this cliff is going to fall, going to collapse. Eventually, you're just like on the plane, you're going to collapse. This is not sustainable. And then I also thought of how the ocean was powerful, that I could be like the ocean. I could be strong and persistent and survive, that I didn't have to depend on a relationship to find the strength that it could exist inside of me. And then I thought about how he's treating me. And I asked myself, and this is the first time I ever asked myself this before. I asked, would it be okay if one of your sons got in a relationship with a woman that treated him this way? Would you be all right watching her do this to one of your kids in the way that Caesar's doing this to you? No, of course not. This is awful. And then I asked, so why is it any different for you? Why should you somehow tolerate this when you would consider this intolerable for one of your kids? What makes you essentially different? And the answer is there isn't anything essentially different. So I started feeling like Dr. Ramani calls this the breaking the shelf moment. That this final tirade that he was having over the chair and chewing me out, it just felt like enough. There has been so much. Now, I know some of you may but you had enough way back on the dating. Yeah, but for whatever reason, where I was in my life and my worldview and how I viewed myself and how I was relating to people, it hadn't been enough. I had never considered the standpoint that it maybe was arrogance on my part to consider this survivable. That maybe the humility that was to accept that I have limitations and I was deserving of respect. None of that ever had crossed my mind before. I thought love was sacrificial. Love went the extra mile. Love turned the cheek. I had never thought of love also taking a stand and standing for right and saying no more. That was a new concept to me. So that night we go over to the restaurant to have dinner. And again, we're eating on picnic tables, and I'm looking at all the couples around us, the families, a lot of families around us. And they're laughing, having fun, joking with each other. And he's sitting across from me, sort of like a toad on a stool, kind of in a humpy, sort of sour mood. And I look at him and I think, how did I ever think that he loved me? There's nothing in here that's loving. He's not celebrating us. He's not infatuated with me. He's not even in love with me. I don't even think he ever was really attracted to me. What? How did I ever mistake it? Because Brad loved me. Brad dearly loved me. How could I have mistaken this for love? This was nothing more than fool's gold that looked sort of like love, but you get close to it, you find out it's a cheap imitation. It just sparkles in the right condition, but there's nothing enduring or precious or beautiful about what we had. This wasn't love. And I realized that I had been mistaken. The entire relationship I'd mistaken essentially something, that I had been rushing so bad to fix my life, to fix all that was broken from being widowed and losing everything. I wanted it all back. And I was so in the mindset of wanting to pursue that I failed to see that you can't just slide anybody in. That's not possible. You don't replace people like that. Brad was not replaceable. I had been wrong to try to replace Brad and try to replace this life that I had lost. And just then, I get a text message from my youngest son, who hasn't really been speaking to me much since Brad died. So I know it's bad, or at least big. There's something big happening. So I look up at Caesar and I said, I gotta take this. It's my youngest. This must be serious. I'll be back. So I walk out to the front of the hotel where I'm alone to call him to see what's up. And that's where we're gonna end this part. This is part 24 of how I met, married, and got scammed by a gold digger. So I left the last part where my youngest son had texted me during dinner, and he doesn't text me. He doesn't communicate much with me since Brad died. We'd kind of had some tension in this relationship. So I know it's really serious. So I go to the front of the hotel to get some quiet, be alone, and take the phone call. And I call him and I say, what's up? And he says, Cameron, which is the name of my oldest son, he said, something's really wrong. He said, Cameron, since this weekend, has been staring at the wall. And he then talks nonsense sometimes. And he'll sometimes seem okay, but then he'll get to staring at the wall and he's losing time. And I said, does he know what day it is and where he's at? And he goes, sometimes, not always. And I said, how long has this been going on? He goes, it was really bad Saturday, so I thought he was dehydrated. I went out and got him a whole bunch of Gatorade and he drank a lot of that, and he seemed a little bit better Saturday night. And then today is Sunday and something's wrong. He's acting weird again. And I heard this and I knew neurologically that he wasn't oriented to time, space, and place, that meant there was something significant occurring. This was a medical emergency. So I say to my youngest, you need to take him to the ER. Don't go to the med center, which I knew my youngest would prefer to do that. You need to go to the ER. Something's terribly wrong here. And I said, please call me the minute you do this and you get in. And he said, can't this wait till tomorrow? I said, no, this can't wait till tomorrow. This is not going to get better. You have to do this tonight. Please tell me you're going to do this tonight. And my heart was in my throat. I was panicked. And I knew that I couldn't even get off this place easily. I knew that, I wanted to be there, and I knew something was really, really wrong. He said, okay. So I go back to Caesar and I said, something's terribly wrong with Cameron. And that was my youngest. And we need to leave. This is a medical emergency. Something's really wrong. We need to find a way off this island. So we leave, wrap up dinner and go back, and I start searching for flights to get home and find out this is going to take me all day. I can't even use the airline that I flew in on, or I don't even remember. Maybe I did or maybe I didn't, but it was going to really take some finagling to get off. We were supposed to be leaving Tuesday, but now we needed to leave on Monday. So somehow I got it set up to where we could get in around midnight Monday night, really actually technically into Tuesday, but it was going to take us all day to get back to Texas. So as we're flying, I hear very limited from Kellen other than he's been admitted. And I did get the word that they did make it and they got admitted. And then midday, my youngest texted me and said, they're using the word cancer now. And I know that is never tossed around loosely, that this is a catastrophic situation, and that my son has cancer. Not only did his father die of cancer, but now my son has cancer. I don't know what type. I just know that he's disoriented and that this is a medical emergency. So we get in and we get into the hospital and we go right up that night. And I can't even focus on how to get to his room. I'm just so lost, so disoriented and so shook up. And they are I can tell they're waiting for us, that they've been watching for us. And they send us up to, I believe it was ICU. And there's only supposed to be 2 people in there, but they're letting us in. They say, it's the mom. Mom's here. So I go in, and I see Cameron looks all white and really fragile. And then in the corner, Kellen stands up, my youngest stands up, and he comes towards me, and he says, Mom, it's leukemia. And then he grabs me and hugs me, and we just start to cry. And I go over to Cameron, and I take his hand, and he comes slightly to, he's not really conscious. And I said, I'm here. And he says, Mom, don't leave me. And I said, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And then he falls back to sleep. I'm aware that Caesar's behind me and he's hearing this. And I'm hoping he's hearing this because I've now made a declaration that I'm going to be here to see this through, that I know what is ahead is going to be really, really hard, and that my son's going to need me. So we go back to my son's apartment, and that night we sleep in his bed because it's empty. And the next day we go in and we meet the staff and talk to the staff, and we meet his staff that's going to be assigned to his case. And they tell us it's between two different types of leukemia. He either has I can't even remember the differences, but one is acute myeloid leukemia and the other one is some other type. The other type is usually more deadly in the beginning, but it's treatable. But AML is usually not quite, is not as catastrophic in the beginning, but it's harder to treat. And and until recently, they said that it's been a high rate of mortality, but that there was a recent new chemotherapy that's targeted to the genetics of this disease, and it's just genetics of this disease is its underpinning, that it's a genetic error that's occurred that's brought on the cancer, and that normally this happens to older adults, but the fact that it happens to a 28-year-old, actually bad news, but it's good news because he's got his youth and strength to help him. So all of this is a lot to take in. It's hard. And then they finish it with this. They said, Mom, this is up to a year-long worth of treatment, and he's going to need you here because this is going to change his life. And we need you to be a part of this care team with him. And I already I'm in. Count on me. I'm in. I'm seeing this through. And I also feel like heaven and earth is moving again, that this is going to be a new way for me to get out, because now I'm back in the United States. I'm having to make a home in Texas. I'm going to have to figure stuff out. And there's no way that Caesar's going to be able to say no to that, because that just doesn't look good. With a family-oriented culture, he's going to have to be okay with this for him to save face. in his community. So I can feel that suddenly a new door is opening that's going to change things for me. So that first 2 weeks, Cameron is inpatient and is receiving his first round of chemotherapy, which is really a scary situation. They come in with gowns and, like big gloves, and the stuff practically glows. I'm serious. It's like this toxic yellow greenish tint stuff. And I also wonder, like, what's going to be the ramifications? Is it going to damage his heart? Is it going to be, is it going to have a hair loss? In fact, they put in a port, so it's being poured directly into his heart. I mean, it's just, the whole thing is really wild. And I also didn't know how much blood, how many transfusions he had transfusions constantly because his platelets were really low. So the whole thing is super scary. And they began to educate us that they're basically wiping out all of his white count. He's going to have no defense against any form of infection or virus or fungus. And that happens after the chemotherapy finishes. So he gets the week long of chemotherapy, which has to be done in the hospital. And it's done pretty much round the clock. They're like 12-hour cycles or something. And that when he gets discharged and go home, that's when his white count's going to drop. And that becomes the danger zone because there's nothing to protect him from any type of infection. And that the whole period of time, we need to be careful about touching him. We need to wear masks. He's not allowed to be around children or pets. We're not to have any like fresh fruit or fresh vegetables, and no flowers, nothing that could possibly bring in like any fungus or anything in. So I'm hearing all of this, and it's just a lot. It sounds like a lot. So he finishes up his first round, and he gets discharged. And interestingly enough, he gets discharged on my birthday. And we go home that night and go celebrate my birthday. And this is where we're going to end this part. This is part 25 of how I met, married, and got scammed by a gold digger. So my son's been discharged from the hospital. He just finished his first round, and it's my birthday. We go home, and we're trying to make it lighthearted and happy. And we bring in pizza that night. And while we're eating, Cameron looks up at me and says, "I have a headache. Do you think that's normal? Should we call the doctor? What do you think?" Well, I now know nothing is minor. Everything's serious. If he has a fever, that's catastrophic. It means he's got an infection. And I don't know what a headache means because part of what they also discovered with this cancer is that it had invaded his central nervous system. He had signs of cancer in his spinal fluid. And they were also giving chemotherapy in that area as well. So I don't know, is this a sign that he's sick from the chemotherapy? Is this a sign that he has an infection? I don't know what it means, but I know that it's not a good sign. So I'm thinking, I can't sleep. I'm going to be awake watching him. But Caesar decides to offer at that moment to set his alarm for 2 a.m. to wake me up so that I can go check on my son. I say to Cameron, I'm going to sleep here on the couch. Why don't you sleep on the other couch beside me so I can keep an eye on you? And I don't want to take Caesar on. It just doesn't make sense to fight over that. It's like, sure, that's a good idea. Thinking it's not, I don't need it. I'm not going to go to sleep. So I'm watching my son, paying attention to how he's doing. I can't sleep. I'm just trying to find something to do to keep my mind occupied because I'm so worried about him. And I suddenly look at the time and I realize it's almost 2 o'clock. And Caesar's phone is about to go off in the bedroom and it's going to wake the whole house back up. And I don't want that to happen. So I sneak into the office where we've been sleeping on the air mattress in there. And I see his phone is right beside his head, that he had fallen asleep on it. So I pick it up, enter the passcode, and it opens right to his emails. Opens right to his messages. And he's messaging Maria. Oh, I'm stunned. So I turn off the alarm, and I take his phone out to the living room to where I can interpret their conversation from Spanish to English. And it's not a full conversation. It just starts abruptly. I can tell something happened, which I soon found out reading the message. It starts off saying, don't forget to delete these messages off of this app so that it's gone and safe. So that explains why this conversation picks up in the center, is that he already had started deleting some of it. And then they're talking about Cameron and his illness. And Maria says, my sister had leukemia as a child and she's fine. She's cured. Cameron will be fine too. He's 28. He's got youth and strength for him. And Caesar replies, yeah, I know, but I can't tell Carrie that because Carrie's really worried. And then Maria says, well, my sister's fine. It's going to be all right. What I'm really worried about is what's going to happen to your half of the money. And my jaw dropped. What? He and her have been talking about the investment, been talking about our company and its value. They've been, and enough so that she's worried about his half, like there is his half. He says, I'm going to have to stay here in Austin. And we got to be really careful these days because I'm around Carrie a lot. So we have to be super careful. And then she said something about how much she misses him, and she sends him this photograph of a very expensive resort nearby, like really expensive. And he laughs and says, your taste is so rich. That's really expensive. I'd be happy staying in a cheap motel as long as I was with you. And then she ends the text message, blowing him a kiss. I'm blown away. He had betrayed me at an intimacy level around commitment. He'd betrayed his vow to me. He had deceived me. He even doesn't respect the contribution I made in regards to starting this business. And now he's betrayed me financially. New low. I didn't see this coming. And yet, I remember I'd forgotten that I had told him all of this in the beginning. I seriously didn't remember that piece. So, I'm normally not brave. I'm pretty big of a chicken. But that night I was pissed. So I decided I'm not putting his phone back in his bed, letting him think that nothing happened. I'm going to put it out on the counter so he knows that I know. And while I'm waiting for him to wake up, I contact that subdivision that we were thinking of moving to north of Cancun, and I said, listen, my son is super sick, and I'm not going to be able to make this purchase. They need us in the United States for at least a year. This just doesn't make any sense to do this, and I'm really apologize, but I got to back out of this deal. And I forget that I'm sending this on a company email, which he has access to. I'm thinking this is just a communication between the two of us. So I send that out while I wait for him to wake up. And he wakes up the next morning, he steps out, and he sees the phone on the counter, and he picks it up and he looks at me. You know, like, what do you know? And I look at him and I say, I know. And then he does, did you see that funny kiss she threw me, that funny face? I asked her why she's making that funny face, and I'm thinking, this is so pitiful. This is so stupid. Do you think I'm going to buy that flimsy excuse as a way to divert me from the bigger topic that you have been betraying me on all levels? And I just ignored it. There was nothing to say. So we somehow pass that day, and the next day, I wake up the next morning, and as I'm out checking on Cameron, I hear sounds of packing. He's packing. We don't have plans to leave, but he's packing, and I go in to see what's up, and he says, I can't be here. It's too painful being around your son. It reminds me of my dad, who also had cancer, and I just can't be here. And I'm thinking, what? You told me, according to your story, that you were living in the United States when your dad was diagnosed with cancer, that he was down, that you never saw him, that you tried to see him, you were flying in at the end, but you missed it, that he died while you were traveling. You never got to see the man. What's painful about being around Cameron? You don't have no perspective to compare it to. I'm thinking, but meanwhile, I have seen a husband die of cancer. I have been down this road before. I know what I'm getting into. I know what it's going to mean. And it's not just losing a husband. It may be losing my child. And I just thought, fine, go. Now, I've told part of the story before, and I've shared how I drove him to the airport. And you all said, why would I do that? I don't know, because I know why I did. I drove him to the airport because he still had his name on my company. I didn't have him off the company. So am I going to draw the lines and say, you're an enemy, and treat him like an enemy so he already can start to gear up? Because remember, he's going to be back in the country now. Now, granted, thank goodness this time, my money's into a different account. He doesn't have access to it. But he could, though, start to pull his weight around as the vice president and possibly do stuff to hurt me. He could make an appointment with the attorney and start gearing this whole thing up to take it on as a fight. So I'm not going to make him overtly an enemy by treating him like one. That would just be stupid. I mean, I already learned don't lose leverage. And I also don't make an enemy of somebody who's already an enemy. Don't increase the hostility. So yeah, I drove him to the airport. And sure enough, he got there and he turned off the 360 that he'd been sharing with me and went dark. He went dark. And I wasn't surprised. I kind of expected that we were basically over, that soon I was going to be hearing from him and he's going to want to know how we're splitting the company up. And that's where we're going to end part 25. This is part 26 of how I met, married, and got scammed by a gold digger. So Caesar's now in Mexico, and I'm in the United States. Cameron is waiting out for when to start chemotherapy round number 2. And meanwhile, they test him to see if the round 1 killed all the cancer, if there's any cancer in his blood. And it comes back that it's failed. And they now know for sure he has acute myeloid leukemia, and he's got one of the worst types. It's a FLT3 with KIT, which that used to have a mortality rate of 50% until this new targeted chemotherapy. So they're going to give him a harder round, a heavier dose, a new regimen, and hope that kills it 100%. And I'm sick. I'm sick. And I'm scared. Really, really scared. So I know I need to get into the country and I need to get myself packed up and packed out. And I know that it's shortly he's going to be proposing that this is over, and I'm waiting for that. And sure enough, about a week later, he texts me and says, I think you know how blue I am. I've been so depressed. And I think this marriage I think you know that it's not working. So I'd like to propose that we go into the attorney's office and that I give you the other half of the company, but I would like a large payout. And the number he proposes is nearly half. It's not quite, but it's nearly a half of the company's worth. Now, he had told me earlier that in a negotiation, the first one to mention money loses. I laughed. I thought, you broke your own rule. You just mentioned the dollar amount first. So I wrote back and said, no, I don't agree to those terms. And he texts back, so what are you thinking, Carrie? I said, I don't know what I'm thinking, but it's not that amount of money. That's off the table. Well, what do you mean? I said, that is off the table. So he gets ready to prepare to go to a family reunion that had been planned ahead, scheduled, that I was supposed to attend, but now he's going to go on alone. And he texts me all about it and acts like it's a normal event. Of course, more money, by the way, goes missing. He apparently gets money stolen. He needs to draw more money out, which is like, I don't believe him. But while he's on this trip, and I know that Cameron's going in for his second round and going to be hospitalized, going to be monitored and not alone, I schedule to fly into Mexico, get access to our where we've been living, our rental, and pack myself up. So I get there, and I also make a plan in case it goes bad that night. I'm going to stay at an Airbnb. So if he gets violent and it goes scary, I have an out. So I fly in, I get into the apartment, and I start to pack myself, and I toss most of it to the road. I don't want most of the stuff that he bought me. I don't want blouses that I wore on dates. I don't want memory photo books that we created together. I don't want the gifts that he bought me as a way to sort of like try to make up when I know he'd been cheating on me. I dump most of it to the road. And the workers going home that day, they see this big pile of stuff and they're like, can we go through it? Absolutely. Absolutely. Take whatever you want. I'm throwing away shoes and purses and clothing and all sorts of stuff. So he comes home that night and I pick him up from the airport. Again, I know I'm not still wanting to tip his hand and piss him off. I still want to act like I'm amenable to possibly some arrangement because we haven't figured out what the deal is. And that night we don't talk about it. We just watch a movie together and it's really quiet. He doesn't seem angry, so I don't go to the Airbnb because I don't sense him in an antagonistic mood. And we wake up the next day and we're heading to the lawyer's office. We have a scheduled appointment. He's going to sign the paperwork over to me. So we park outside the attorney's office the next day, and Caesar looks over at me. He says, "So what are you thinking?" I said, "Not with the number you're proposing." "Well, what are you thinking?" I said, "I'll tell you what's sitting in cash in my account right now." I said, "You can have that amount." It was 1/5 of the value. Yeah, 1/5 of the value of the company of his half. But it was only 1/3 of what he was wanting. I said, "You can have that. You can have the car. We bought a few furniture for possibly moving again. You can sell that and keep it. I'll give you the cash that's sitting in this country if you sign over the half of the company to me." And he says, "Well, I don't know. Maybe I don't know if I can live 2 years on that." And he starts tallying up a budget. I'm like, "What? You're using the stipulation of living for 2 years on this?" And by the way, the amount of money, yeah, he could have lived 5 years on this and never worked. You live a careful life. Don't live in Playa. There's lots of places in Mexico. This would have been, if it had gone really far, especially if he'd invested and then started living off the interest, he could have gone really far with this. I'm just stunned. He says, "How about I get the profit off the company, half the profit for the company for 1 year. No, make that 2 years. We have to write this into this negotiation that it's for 2 years." So we go in and we sit down with the attorneys, and they then start the procedure of making sure he understands that he's being removed as the co-owner, and that I'm now going to be the sole owner, and that he's giving up his shares, and that they all come to me. And yeah, no problem. And I know he's waiting to add that final stipulation. He wants half of the net profit for the next 2 years. So they get done, he signs, I sign, we sign all the, initial and sign all the pages, and he's now ready to add this new stipulation to be added as an addendum. And they look at him, these two young attorneys, and they look at him and said, "Mr. Caesar, you need to leave the room. You're no longer an owner here. You're not allowed to be privy to this meeting. It's confidential. You need to please exit the room." Wait, Caesar says. "Wait, I didn't get that final stipulation. Carrie, you said I would get half of the profits for the next 2 years of the rentals." They said, "Mr. Caesar, you need to leave the room. You're no longer allowed in here. Leave the room." "But wait, leave the room, Mr. Caesar. You're now no longer allowed here." He stands up. He's furious, and I can tell he's trying to will me to stand up to exit with him. I don't. He walks out furious. Meanwhile, we have a plane that we need to catch, for me to catch back to Austin. And I know the time is short. And I look at them and I said, "Thank you. Anything else that we need to do here?" And they said, "No." And I said, "I'm changing the will, and I will be flying in next month, but I'm not leaving the airport before I sign that new will. The new stipulation of the will is the company goes to my sons, that Mr. Caesar's to be taken off. He is now to not inherit this property, but I want it prepared and ready for me because I am not leaving the airport. I know I have to be in the country to sign it, but can you meet me in the airport? I fear for my life." He said, "Yes, we'll meet you at the airport. It will be ready in 4 weeks, and you can sign it, and you'll have a new will for this company." I said, "Okay." I stood up, walked out, went back to the car where he was waiting, fuming, and he drove me to the airport. And that's where I'm going to end part 26, and I'll pick up what happens next. This is part 27 of how I met, married, and got scammed by a gold digger. So now the company is mine. I'm flying home. Cameron is wrapping up round 2 of chemotherapy to come home. And I know that I need to take care of the divorce, that I still have to confront him, possibly legally, as we finalize that piece. And there's another vulnerability here. And I know he's not going to file. Remember, he forgot to file the last divorce. He's certainly not going to take any responsibility for this one. But I want to cut all ties with this guy, that we have no connection. Meanwhile, Cameron one day comes down in between round 2 and round 3, knocking on my door, and he says, "I got a fever." And this was like 10 a.m. in the morning. We rush to the hospital, get there like by 11 or something. They finally admit him, which takes forever. And by the time they admit him, he's already running 105 or 104 degree temp. And they immediately move him into ICU. He's really, really ill. and they can't stabilize his blood pressure. His oxygen level is low, and they can't seem to get it high enough. And they're talking about possibly ventilating him as a way to get enough oxygen into him. And I'm terrified. And it like happened literally just within minutes. It went from normal to near death. And I'm like trying to like go through this, and it's hard. I mean, I'm even afraid to leave the hospital for fear they're going to call me and tell me he's dying. I remember going home those nights, and I had have no words to pray. The only thing I could say was to say, just please, God, please don't take him. So I'm doing what I can, filing paperwork on my phone or from a laptop from Cameron's hospital room. And the state that we're divorcing from was where we had lived, where we briefly had a house and lived. And they're asking for mediation. I'm thinking that's the worst case scenario. If we go in for mediation, Caesar's going to present well. He's going to ask for something, even though we have no bank accounts, no property, nothing in the United States. He's going to still find something he's going to claim that he has a right to. So I'm feeling super panicked. And I go ahead and I fill the paperwork, submit everything, and he doesn't want to sign. I don't know why. He insists that he has to fly up to the United States to sign the paperwork. And in the meantime, while all this is happening, he's still staying in touch with me, and we're acting like really nice, like everything's okay, but although it's not. And he texts me that he needs to change his phone number, that one of the sex workers he had met up during that break had approached him and was blackmailing him and threatened to kill him. And had sent a text message of a sicario, of an assassin with carrying an automatic, saying if he doesn't pay up, and he says you don't want to make me angry. It was a phrase like that, only more culturally inappropriate. You don't want to make me angry. It was a threat of like, if you don't pay up, I'm going to kill you. So he changed his phone number. So Caesar tells me he's going to fly in to sign the paperwork, and meanwhile I'm totally preoccupied with what's going on with Cameron. And I'm thinking, I don't get this. Why spend several $100s round trip for something you could just log in and do? It doesn't make, why do this? But I meet him at the airport. We find a park, which dumb, don't do that. Don't go someplace where there's no people. We're sitting in this car alone in the park, and I'm thinking, this is stupid. I picked the wrong place. I should have done this at like a Starbucks or something. And he's looking at the paperwork. Slowly, we're looking at it. I don't know, Carrie. I don't know. I said, what is there to know, Caesar? We have no property. We have nothing in the United States. Everything that we had has been divided up and already taken care of in Mexico. What's your hesitation? I don't know, Carrie. You promised me that net profit for 2 years. I wanted half of that. And I said, he said, you promised me. And he stuck out his hand, and they leaned forward, bent near me to near my ear and whispered, because you don't want to make me mad. And I knew he was quoting that text message that had been sent to him as a threat. And I looked at that hand, and I looked at that man, and nothing had been honest or real or genuine. Everything had been a deception. None of his words meant anything. It was just another manipulation to get him one step closer to what he wanted. And I took his hand and I shook it. I promise, I said. And I thought at the same time, as much as you've ever promised anything to me. And he signed the paper, and then he got onto the airplane and he flew back home. And he never got another dollar or cent out of me. That was the last of the money he ever saw, was what happened in Mexico. I'm still, meanwhile, the courts are now requesting that we actually show up in person to get the divorce. They're asking for us to show up for mediation, and before they'll even allow this. And I'm like, so I called the clerk and I said, listen, I'm in Texas. I'm not living in Iowa. My son is gravely ill. He's in the ICU. And I can't come for mediation. What can I do here? She said, no, I'm not to offer any legal advice. I can't tell you what to do, but have you filed a motion? Did you tell the courts that your son is gravely ill? If you send paperwork that prove it, that they will take that under consideration. But I didn't tell you that, but I would suggest you file a motion to that effect. And everything else she said in your file is complete. You have all the settlement papers are here. Everything's been signed, but I would suggest that you do that. So that afternoon, I think it was like September 20th or something, 2019, I filed that paperwork as the clerk suggested that I did, claiming that due to medical emergency and hardship that I can't come in person to finish out this divorce. I get an email a few hours later that the divorce is final and that the judge had signed the paperwork. I was divorced within weeks of filing. And I know I was super lucky, and I know that most people experience incredible financial abuse, legal abuse in this stage of their relationship. And I was so lucky that I got out. It was very expensive because of what happened in Mexico. But even then, I saw like miraculous stuff what happened in the attorneys where I didn't get taken for more. So a few weeks later, I fly into Mexico, meet those two attorneys in the airport as I specify. We signed the new will, taking my ex off. So he is now no longer heir to the company, and I was heir to the company. And I didn't hear from him again until COVID hit in March of 2020, when he said that he's running out of money and he needed more money. Would I somehow give him more money? And he knew I was writing a book and he was wanting a big payoff on that. And I said, no, you're nobody to me. I would give you a percentage of the royalty if I can use your name, which he said, I don't want you using my name. And this is what he said: the more honest you are, the more harmful and bad it makes me look. Like, yeah, it does make you look bad. So we didn't come to any agreement of me using his name, which is why I'm using a pseudonym, but he didn't get any more money. But I want to tell you what I learned as I was writing the book, Love You More, and some takeaways I have about this whole big story. And this is where I'm going to end part 26. This is part 28 of how I met, married, and got scammed by a gold digger. So my relationship with Caesar is over, but I'm a mess. I feel broken. I don't understand what happened. I don't understand what I missed. And the way I process things is to write them. So I began writing my story. And as I'm writing this story and getting it all on paper, I discover social media and find TikTok. And in that process, I start to hear about narcissistic abuse, which I'd never heard of that. But I had been reading Patrick Carnes' book called Betrayal Bonds, and with the suspicion that I'd had a betrayal bond, which is now called a trauma bond. I had never heard of cognitive dissonance, how that is so confusing because you can't tell what's real. And I've never heard of the terms narcissistic abuse. I mean, I know a lot about narcissism, and I recognized I'd been in a relationship with somebody who had a lot of narcissistic traits and a lot of psychopathic traits, but I didn't know that this was narcissistic abuse. I didn't even actually know this was abuse. There was a lot of gaslighting, and I recognized the overt signs of it, but I didn't recognize the subtleties, and I'd never heard of coercive control or ambient abuse or any of that before. But I'm writing all this story down, and it starts to make sense. And when I hear other survivors describe what they'd gone through, all the weird shenanigans and the way things get twisted and how arguments would go and circular arguments, the fact that nothing would ever be wrapped up and how whatever they said got used against them and how terrible couples therapy went, it's like, yeah, me too. This happened to me too. But what I did do was I jumped into group therapy with a group I had found online near the end of that marriage that was for partners of sex addicts. So I joined a 3-hour-a-week group therapy coaching sessions and did that for a year. So healing, so helpful to find out I wasn't the only person who'd gotten duped like this, that this was a kind of common dynamic, because probably a lot of these men were also narcissistic. So we're talking about the way in which they betray us, confuse us, deceive us, all of that. So it was very, very normalizing. And as I'm writing the book, I decide I want to reach out to his past wives. Now, number 4, he still had regular contact with. They talked back and forth. So I didn't want to reach out to her because I figured she's in his camp, and then she'll let him know that I'm doing this. But I reach out to number 1, who lived in Mexico, number 2, who lived in Midwest, and number 3, who I didn't know. I knew a little bit. I knew the least about her. I was the most curious about her. I heard back from number 1, who shared the beginnings of the first marriage ever, and learned that he had abandoned her pretty early and left her with a child that had a disability. and he fled the country because she said he was up to something illegal. So he left the country without her and then divorced her long distance. And she felt it was to avoid paying for this child's medical needs. And she also said he started cheating pretty much right away from day one. And in fact, when she was in labor with the son, he was cheating on her then with somebody else that day. Nice lady. Her and I stayed in contact. And then I heard from number two. Number two, they'd been married for 17 years. It was on again, off again. They also had a child. She asked me, did he beat you too? No, I said, he didn't hit me. She said, you're really lucky. I was worried for you that he was going to be abusive to you. Wow. I knew he was dangerous. I'd seen him pull a knife on somebody, but he'd never, whenever we got in an argument, he would just split. He would leave and be gone for half a day. But he never laid a hand. He did throw a few things, broke some phones around me, but he never directly threatened me. Once he rushed me, but that's the closest it ever got. She said, you're really lucky. And then she asked a few more questions. I learned that he'd been cheating actively on her too. He'd been, and that they were on again, off again. Number 3, I left a message and I never heard from her for a long time. It was like at least 6 months or more. And she texted me back and said, hey, I just saw this message through Facebook. You interested in having a conversation? She said, yeah, I'd absolutely love it. So she shared her phone number and I called her. And again, she told me their whole story. He had done to her exactly what he had done to me. He was taking business trips, so-called business trips, only he was meeting up with some other people. She found out accidentally that he wasn't where he said he was, with who he said he would be with. And she did what I couldn't do. She actually locked him out of the house, went to pick up her car, and took it back, and then left him to when he came home from the airport, he had no place to go and no car to get anywhere. I thought, amazing. And then she said something that absolutely stunned me. She said, I was really sick. I think he was poisoning me. I about dropped the phone. Because as I was writing this book, I had a person who was helping me, kind of like a writing buddy, and she said, Carrie, I think he was poisoning you. And I even, near that end, when I told you that I'd lost a toenail and I had all those lines across my fingernails, I was researching on the bed next to him what kind of poisons could do this to you. I knew that I had read that there was a poison that actually, they're called Meese lines, put Meese lines on your fingernails. And I suspect, because I had, if you look up arsenic poisoning, it gives you a dark urine. It causes this weird watery diarrhea. It puts lines across your fingernails. And it makes you really sick. If you don't get a big enough dose to kill you, it makes you like vomit saliva. That's one of the other symptoms. It makes your white count climb up. Remember when I got hospitalized and the staff told me my white count was really high and it looked like I had appendicitis? She goes, yeah, I think he was poisoning me. I got better when the marriage ended. I thought, crap. So then I started to reach out. I found a retired poison control nurse, and I got to speak to a doctor in Atlanta and described my symptoms. And they couldn't say for sure it was arsenic, but they said it sure sounds like you were exposed to a heavy metal. And arsenic, yeah, it definitely could be one of the heavy metals, could be that. In fact, it left me sick for at least a year, roughly every 4 to 6 weeks. I would suddenly take a turn and get really ill. My GI I would swell and feel really in a lot of pain and cold. It would send me to bed, and they were trying to figure out what was going wrong. Why was I having these bouts of GI distress? We never did get to the bottom of it, but as time has passed, those symptoms have disappeared, and I chalk it up now that I was being poisoned. That voice near the end, when I was thinking of moving north of Cancun, it says, don't. Nobody will know if something bad happens to you. You're going to be cut off from everyone who's aware of you and aware of your existence, and they won't have any clue what's happened to you. I think now that was a warning, a premonition, and that he was going to do that to get the whole company. Then he would have inherited the whole amount of things. Now, I don't have any proof. People have said to me, why don't you submit a hair sampling? But by the time this happened, it was 2 years later. And remember, I don't have a lot of hair in my head, nothing certainly that long that would be 2 years from 2 years ago. So there was no way for me to get any sample. And the doctor that I spoke to said, your body pretty fast metabolizes that. It would be really hard to get evidence of this. So it wasn't something I could pursue. It's nothing that I can prove, but it does make sense, particularly now that there's another person in his life that also believed that he'd been poisoning her as well. So last I know, he's living in Mexico somewhere. I don't know what he's doing. He left me. He and Maria posted photos that looked like they got engaged right as before we even were divorced. They were already sporting potentially engagement photos, but I don't know if he and her are still together. It's 5 years. He doesn't tend to make 5 years with anybody, but so I really don't know what he's doing. I don't know what he's up to. I don't have any contact with him, and I intend never to again. So in the next one, I'm going to tell you some thoughts as a psychologist about what I think happened here as my wrap up. And this is the end of part 28. I'm now losing track. This is part 29 of how I met, married, and got scammed by a gold digger. And I think it may be my last part unless you think of some questions that I failed to answer. I did make another discovery as I was writing the book. And this is what I learned as I started looking at his backup of his phone, and I started putting things on a timeline. I also had access to some of his travel accounts, and what I discovered was that at every juncture in our relationship, big important junctures, he and Maria met up. And this is what I learned. I found proof. Remember I told you he went to the family wedding when he asked me to go steady? He and Maria met up at that family wedding. They were together. And then we started dating and we got engaged in February of 2017. He and Maria, he flew her into where we were living that next weekend. When we got back from California, he flew her in and they met in Iowa. And then we got married, and then that's when he texted her and said the marriage felt like a prison. And then when we split up, she flew in immediately again and saw him. Meanwhile, he'd been communicating with her on and off. And in fact, there was an incident where I caught him calling somebody, caught him on the Bluetooth. My son was in the car, and it was Maria. He was calling Maria. So they met during our separation. They were in contact prior to our separation. And then right after we ended up splitting up, of course, I caught him and her talking about Cameron's illness at the end. And then right after we divorced and separated, he had that family trip, and I know that he and her met up again. So this is what I think. His favorite show, his favorite film was Dirty Rotten Scoundrels with Steve Martin and Michael Caine. He would quote it. He actually made me watch it. I'd seen it before, but he made me watch it. What is it about? It's about two guys who partner up to scam this rich person. And he used to think it was funny. In fact, one of the things he shared with me about himself is that he loved movies, he watched them over and over, and that he then tried to imitate them to the degree he could. That some of the people that he respected the most, like Lee Iacocca was one of them, and I think Onassis was another. He would watch their life story, watch their movies over and over, and learn from that. I think he was imitating Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, that he and Maria were cahoots, and that they would meet up. I don't know if they were together. They were planning together, and they would meet up to then plan the next stage of whatever it was, because she had access to an attorney that knew Mexican law, that were able to sort of like come up with a plan, connive together that would put me in a weak position legally. I don't have any proof of this, but I can't verify it. But it seems to make sense if you look at the timeline that they were planning and scheming of this together. So here's some takeaways I had about it for myself. I now know that I came from a neglectful, emotionally abusive home. And of course, you already know that there was SA involved when I was really, really young. And then on top of it was also a really religious home where women were to know their place. And we were taught joy, Jesus first, others second, you last. So I was really taught to know my place, that I shouldn't speak up, that I should just trust life would work out and work to my benefit because I was being good and being obedient. I confused kindness for niceness. I thought I was being kind. I was just being nice. And I also had no idea that I was betraying myself in the ways that I was doing things, that I should show myself respect. I didn't even know what that meant. And I also had a sense of my identity was us. If we're healthy, then I'm good. If we're happy, then I'm good. I never had a sense of myself until just recently, till I've been out of this relationship, that it's me first and then us. That I should first be concerned about whether or not it serves me and is good for me. And then if it is, in a healthy relationship, it'll serve the relationship. That was a new conclusion. And of course, I already shared with you about how narcissistic abuse wasn't a term, wasn't even talked about. We never realized when I was going through graduate school that narcissism is a disease that, or condition, disorder that actually doesn't affect the one who's suffering with it. It impacts everyone around them. That's what you have to put up with. And what I also didn't know was that a person who has a lot of narcissistic traits doesn't want you to know who they are. They're afraid that if you knew them, you wouldn't like them, you wouldn't choose them. And so they never let you meet the real person. I don't even know if they know the real person. You meet a persona. I met the person that Caesar thought I wanted to meet on that first date. Christian, upstanding man who was a manager, raising kids. That's not actually who not that he didn't do some of that, but that's not really who he was at the core. He was a philanderer, He was somebody he never planned any monogamy, never planned to be faithful to any woman, who really believed, his favorite saying is, I'm an architect of my own life, or something like that. Yeah, absolutely. He's directing his life, nobody else, and he's going to do exactly what he wants, when he wants, how he wants. Kind of be damned to everybody else. I didn't appreciate that. And I didn't know that getting into a relationship with a narcissist was going to be really dangerous. And that confusion I felt, I couldn't tell what was true. Was he working? I know all of you watching this is like, it's obvious. He wasn't investing in you. He didn't love you. He was taking it, but it wasn't obvious to me. I didn't know that. I believed what he said. I had been raised to believe what people said, to ignore what they do. And they even said that, don't watch what I do, pay attention to what I said. Even though they know that's a mixed up of that saying, it's not actually what it means, but that's how I'd been taught to raise. That's how I'd been showed respect. So I was confused by the inconsistencies that I was seeing. Was he invested? Was he working as hard as he ever worked? Did he want us to work? Or was all of that a lie? Well, yeah, now I know it was all a lie, but I didn't know that at the time. And I really never knew what my non-negotiable was. I never really clarified. I thought that I had done that work to know, like, for example, one of them, mine is today that I didn't have at that point was, you deceive me. You're not all in. You don't have my back. I can't trust you. I don't want a relationship with you. And I'm not going to just assume you're a trustworthy person. But see, I used to believe that. I used to believe it was nice. It was good to believe that everybody was good until they proven you wrong. Well, now I know that's crap. Don't do it that way. People need to earn trust. You need to start assuming that you don't know this person. You don't know what their motives are. You need to watch, pay attention, and make sure that they've earned the right to be in your life. But I didn't know that. And I also didn't know about a trauma bond in the middle of that. I didn't know that he had used intermittent reinforcement, that hot and cold behavior, to set up a lot of confusion. I now know this is a guy who kept cliff notes on the women he was meeting. He actually planned out what he would say and strategize about interactions with people. I had no clue that I was meeting that sophisticated of a predator who was keeping me way off. In fact, I asked my coach, who had seen a lot of sex addiction, a lot of like nasty behavior, and I said, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being mild and 5 being severe, how serious, how dangerous do you think Caesar was? And she said, I think he's a 4. And I learned one more thing that really shocked me. My developer in our building didn't like him, and my realtor, who was representing me, this is after the divorce, said, I don't know why the developer he likes you, but he can't stand Caesar. So he said, I asked him, I said, why don't you like Caesar? And he said, I'll tell you why. He said he would storm out of that condo, and he would get into the elevator, and we have cameras in the elevator that he didn't know. And he would be tearing the elevator apart. He said, we were afraid he was going to damage the elevator. He was beating it so badly. And we thought, if that's what he's doing in the elevator, what is he doing to her? So this developer would bump into me in the hallway and say, Carrie, how are you doing? Are you doing all right? And I kept thinking, why are you so nice? Because we actually have some business tension between us. We don't align on everything.